This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging markets were hit by some uncertainty ahead of the first quarter earnings season. Investors are pulling out of equities as they wait to see how corporates have fared this year, as of course the threat of the COVID-19 pandemic clouds the economic recovery progress. Now, MSCI's index of emerging market stocks tumbled 0.9% on the day. Meanwhile, South Africa's JSE All Share posting some losses across the board. We saw the resource index was hit hardest, falling almost 2% today. Of course, industrial metal prices as a whole headed south on fears of a pullback in top consumer China. Now, also coming up on today's show, we'll be looking at efforts to revive Tanzania's stalled liquefied natural gas project. Iran blames Israel for an attack on an underground nuclear site. And Egypt discovers a city that dates back more than 3,000 years. Well, we kick off tonight's show in Tanzania, where President Samia Suluhu Hassan has directed the country's Ministry of Energy to speed up the stalled liquefied natural gas project. Now, she's urging the department to take on board investors who are ready for its implementation. The country's LNG project has stalled since 2018, and that's following the government's decision to review production sharing agreements in the country. Here's CGTN's Isaac Lukando with the details.
Tanzania's new president is keen on exploiting Tanzania's gas reserves, but she feels bureaucracy may be getting in the way. The president's stated ambition is to lift her country from lower middle-income status.
Negotiation teams should finalize things so that we get to work and the country benefits from these resources. Legal and policy challenges should be made clear so that we sit down and work on them so that things move.
After failing to conclude host government agreements, negotiations with investors in Tanzania's liquefied natural gas project initially stopped in 2017. They resumed in 2018, only to stall again. The president's move offers new hope to industry players like the Tanzania Oil and Gas Service Providers Association. However, they caution that the project should be economically viable.
If you look at the project in Mozambique, when you look at the project in USA, when you look at the project same in Qatar, all these are very, very low cost of production. But given the large quantity of gas, which is highly competitive fiscal system. So these are the challenges that we need to overcome in Tanzania. And simply by sitting and working together as a team to establish and maintain stable, predictable, and regulatory framework so that the LNG could be exported.
According to the Ministry of Energy, Tanzania has proven natural gas reserves of 57 trillion cubic feet, with at least 49.5 trillion cubic feet of those reserves far offshore in the Indian Ocean. The World Bank estimates that an investment in the range of 30 to 40 billion US dollars is needed to develop Tanzania's liquefied natural gas production and export capability. It further notes that sales of the gas could provide economic benefits to the country over the next 30 years. Apart from potentially creating 12 to 14,000 jobs, the project may also benefit the country's gas experts.
Transfer of know-how. When you have the biggest LNG plant in Tanzania that, what we call it, invest $30 billion, you ought to have the best technology. So this is one of the benefits that we think that Tanzania will benefit. So we are looking at 360-degree perspective.
With Tanzanian gas prices currently the cheapest in East Africa, the exploitation of the country's gas reserves is likely to push prices further down, increasing competitiveness and benefiting ordinary Tanzanians. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
And heading to South Sudan now, the government plans to use the 174 million grant from the IMF to support its budget, pay its arrears, and of course revive its ailing economy. Now, a drop in oil prices in the international market, coupled with the impact of COVID-19 and of course flooding across parts of the country, have had a pretty severe negative effect on its economy. Here's CGTN Patrick Oyet with more.
The Bank of South Sudan says it will use the $174.2 million loan to strengthen its monetary policy framework. The bank says the money will be used for budget support to pay salary arrears. It adds that part of the money will remain with the central bank for a balance of payment support.
We import most of the things from outside. And when you import things from outside, exchange rate sensitivities have a major impact on exchange rate, on inflation. So this loan will help us to stabilize the exchange rate. And if we stabilize the exchange rate, then automatically we will stabilize prices.
South Sudan's Apex Bank says the loan will be paid back on a long-term basis without interest. South Sudan's government has not paid salaries for civil servants for 5 months. The central bank says it is working to get its books in order by the end of the next financial year. The government says it is looking for alternative revenue sources to reduce dependence on loans.
We want to start a journey with our taxpayers, improving our services so that they can conveniently pay their taxes.
The central bank also says it is trying to unify the official exchange rate with the market rate. There are currently 3 exchange rates. One is set by the central bank, another by commercial banks, and a third one in the black market. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Meanwhile, Tunisia has signed an economic reform package with one of the country's most powerful labor unions. The North African nation is dealing with unprecedented financial problems, and this agreement could pave the way for another deal with the International Monetary Fund. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi.
Tunisian Prime Minister and the UGTT's Labor Union Secretary General will initiate the reform of 7 state-owned enterprises after signing a landmark deal. Hicham Meshishi reaffirmed his commitment to preserving the National Carrier Tunisia, the Tunisian Steel Company, the Tunisian Stevedoring and Handling Company, the Central Pharmacy of Tunisia, the Company of Pharmaceutical Industries of Tunisia, and the Tunisian Electricity and Gas Company.
We all know there will be no successful economic reform plan without reforming the ailing state enterprises. We all belong to the public sector, which needs urgent measures to remain a locomotive of the national economy. The government does not plan to sell public companies because they are the treasures of the state.
Both sides further agreed to reform the direct as well as the indirect subsidy system and control prices. A specialized committee will also restructure the distribution channels and reform the tax system.
Our objective is to improve the purchasing power and boost the economy, to make it solid in the face of domestic and international challenges. A competitive and strong economy will pave the way for social reforms. The labor union and the government have made a historic step which is laying the foundations of tax justice. We don't want the IMF to impose reforms. That's why we are developing our own reform plan.
Tunisia's 2021 budget forecasts borrowing needs of $7.2 billion, including about $5 billion in foreign loans. The IMF has urged Tunisia to cut its wage bill and limit energy subsidies to reduce the fiscal deficit. Authorities in Tunis say the government intends to guarantee necessary conditions for the success of the economic salvage plan.
The government is holding meetings with social partners so as to develop a consensual economic salvage plan that will be submitted to international donors in the next few weeks. We call on all parties to join this effort to form a common front in discussions with our international partners.
According to the Prime Minister's office, 5 think tanks will be set up by government experts and unionists to work on the new economic and social reform plan. Prime Minister Hichem Meshishi declared that the business climate in Tunisia is facing many regulatory, legal and administrative obstacles. Meshishi and the union leaders added that the government and the UGTT will respect the deal on economic reforms in order to achieve economic growth in the North African state. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And now to some corporate headlines today. Tullow Oil has drilled its first well on Ghana's Jubilee field, kicking off its drill program in the country. Now, the Maersk Ventura, which has been contracted for 4 years, is expected to drill 4 wells in 2021, which include 2 Jubilee production wells, a water injector well, and 1 10 gas injector well. Meanwhile, the Kenyan government has introduced new ownership rules in the telecom sector. That's part of efforts to encourage local ownership of ICT firms in the nation. The new licensing policy gives telecoms firms up to March 2024 to ensure local ownership of at least 30% in these companies. Meanwhile, MTN Group has disclosed a $5 billion valuation of its mobile money arm as it prepares to sell or list a minority stake to draw global investors enticed by fast-growing fintech assets. MTN's valuation of its unit follows the recent $300 million investment in Airtel Africa's mobile money business by MasterCard and TPG Holdings. That, of course, stood at a valuation of about $2.65 billion. And Chinese tech giant Alibaba has been penalized $2.8 billion by the sector regulator after a probe determined that it had abused its market position for years. The company added that it was not aware of any further anti-monopoly investigations by Chinese regulators, though it did signal that Alibaba and its competitors will remain under review in China over mergers and acquisitions. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now, still coming up. Zimbabwe bans the importation of second-hand cars older than 10 years. And South Africa rejects WhatsApp's new data privacy policy.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Well, let's head to Zimbabwe now. The country has banned the importation of second-hand vehicles older than 10 years. Now, the country's finance minister made the announcement during his budget speech for this year. And CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya now takes a look at the implications of this ban on the country's auto industry.
There's been a steady increase in the number of second-hand car dealerships in Zimbabwe in recent years. Evidence of growing demand, which has been unmet since the collapse of local assembly plants whose units used to dominate the roads here. The majority of vehicles available in the sales yards are more than 10 years old. They will soon be no longer available due to the ban and will rob dealers of their bread and butter.
Most of these imports are usually from 2000 to about 2008, right? That's most of the cars that you get in Zimbabwe right now that people can afford. What's the other option? I mean, we don't have a vibrant car industry in Zimbabwe, and there's no public transport to talk about.
Treasury says that upwards of $1.5 billion was spent on light vehicle imports between 2015 and 2020. It's trying to reduce that amount in order to preserve foreign currency and to help revive the local motor industry, which had been, for years, lobbying for the second-hand imports to be regulated.
Our reaction as an association is that we are in the right direction. We do have an MIDP, which is the Motor Industry Development Policy, which we coined in 2018. In the MIDP, we had not envisaged a total ban, but we had chose to control, first of all, by duty and import setex, making them a bit expensive so that we phase them slowly. Whilst that is happening, we were now going to look for MOUs for our industry where people can now assemble the affordable vehicles.
Implementation of the strategy has been stifled by foreign currency shortages. The industry is now hopeful that savings realized from second-hand imports will result in them being allocated more funds so they can get more vehicles rolling off their production plants and onto these roads again. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, South Africa's information regulator is remaining firm on WhatsApp's new data privacy policy, and that's following a public outcry. The social messaging giant is forcing users to allow information sharing with third parties, including a parent company Facebook, or risk being booted off the app. Now, the regulator says this goes against South African law and has to be changed. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with the details.
South Africa's information regulator is not backing down. WhatsApp's new data policy allows information to be shared with parent company Facebook and other companies, which contravenes the country's Protection of Personal Information Act.
With reference to the condition on specific processing and further processing, it seemed as if that there were some issues, in particular there, as well as with aspects relating to retention. You know, we've always been told that a WhatsApp communication is encrypted, it's one way, and it will not be stored. But if you look at the policy, it actually does make provision for certain instances where a message may be intermittently stored, and it doesn't say until when.
WhatsApp is the most popular social messaging app in the world. It does, however, have more favorable policies for European users.
Prima facie, on the face of it, when one looks at the fact that there are two different terms and conditions and policies pertaining either to EU subjects or non-EU subject, that on the face of it causes concern. They did acknowledge receipt of our correspondence where we've detailed what the issues are. So we are expecting a response within a reasonable time.
The social messaging giant delayed its policy implementation until May following a public outcry. Social media experts, however, don't believe there's anything sinister about the move.
WhatsApp is trying to find ways to actually improve their offering to us as consumers and to be able to then charge businesses for that improvement in offering. So think about this. If you wanted to order food online, instead of having to do it via an app, you could do it within the WhatsApp ecosystem and be able to chat to your delivery service on WhatsApp. But in order for that transaction to happen, WhatsApp now needs to be able to share some of that data with a supplier that you choose to speak with.
South Africans have meanwhile been trying other services, but it's not likely to dent the popularity of the easy-to-use app.
In truth, you do have some WhatsApp consumers maybe testing out Telegram and Signal, but with the lack of enough context and with an unfamiliarity with the ecosystem and a change of new learning, you're still going to find that people default to the platform they know best, to where their network is, and the network is sitting on WhatsApp right now.
WhatsApp has until July to alter its policy to fall in line with South Africa's amended Personal Protection Act. If it fails to comply, there could be hefty penalties to pay. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Now, Africa will need to develop the capacity to produce COVID-19 vaccines across the continent, and that is according to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The director of the Africa CDC says only 5 African nations appear to have the capacity to produce these vaccines. Here's Angelo Coppola with more.
Senegal, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt and South Africa are at different levels of preparedness to produce the vaccines.
So it's investment, building capacity, having technologies, and also the right skill set. Those are all the ingredients that you require to manufacture vaccines on the continent. They're rather scarce on the continent.
The right skills are critical in achieving this, and that includes having a suitable pharmaceutical environment.
So you need to have the universities that can give you the basic skills, but you need to also have a pharmaceutical environment from which you can also attract others.
There are several African pharmaceutical companies that have already had early successes. South African-based Aspen Pharmacare has clinched a deal to produce 300 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in its Eastern Cape facility over the next 12 months.
You require significant capability around sterile manufacturing and sterile capability. It's not an easy capability. It's a rather complex one. And as we've seen now with the advent of the pandemic, a much sought after capability around the world.
Another South African operation has also had some success. It started with importing, moved into packaging and labeling, and then formulation. It's announced a transaction with Immunity Bio, a US-based immunotherapy company that plans to move to the next level.
What we're trying to do with Immunity Bio is to plug that gap where BioVac can be able to manufacture from scratch vaccines, the first of which would be a COVID-19 vaccine. So we'll have to build that capacity, and that is the nature of the transaction that we announced.
The continental skills deficit still poses a challenge.
The continent is a net importer of medicines and vaccines. And unless there's a properly implemented coherent strategy to support local manufacture, which there isn't at this point in time across the entirety of the continent, unless you get that right, then it becomes very difficult to establish sustainable manufacturing capacity on the continent.
While the immediate need is to deal with COVID-19 and the pandemic that's spreading throughout the continent, the longer-term view is to find a solution that will allow for local manufacture. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, Africa has indeed felt the Chinese impact on the continent. That is according to the chairperson of the Kenya-China Friendship Group of Parliament, Shakil Shabir. Now, Shakil says infrastructure development and the Belt and Road Initiative are among some of the benefits that African nations are enjoying as China this year celebrates the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party. Here's CGTN's Nick Mutimba, who had a conversation with Shakil Shabir.
I think, how do I see our relationship with the Kenya
China relationship, and specifically Africa, is that like all Kenyans, we have felt the initiative of the Belt and Road initiative and the development of infrastructure in Africa over the last 15 or 20 years. And we have seen more effective end product by the Chinese who have come and given us aid without conditions and without modality. The Africa relationship with China has been varied in every country. Kenya, we have seen the Thika Highway, we have seen a railway that the last work on the railway was when my grandfather came to this country over 100 years ago. So we have not had a change of that railway system for that time. So we have now a new railway system. We have new roads. We have certain communication systems. And I think as much as we are saying that we are developing, we want to be able to do so on an equal footing with our relationship with the rest of the world. In the history of this world, never has we seen any state remove over 100 million or majority of its rural urban population out of extreme poverty. So that brings in itself a potential within China that, for Kenya, gives us the potential of knowing that there is a more of a market in China for our goods and services and our tourism. Already we have started seeing Chinese tourists coming to Kenya. I've seen Chinese tourists going all over the world. I think the potential of our development is based upon the philosophy that we seem to have lost due to colonialization, because in Africa we used to share everything. The African tradition was that of sharing. The 100 years has been to us a very important linkage and a very important goal that has come to the performance of the country of China and our relationships with them. We would like to be very much part and parcel of the celebration of that 100 years of the Communist Party.
You are watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now. Still coming up on the show. Iran blames Israel for an attack on an underground nuclear site. And pub, gardens, shops and hairdressers reopen as the UK eases its lockdown rules.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time. Now, what is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
As Asia recovers from the pandemic, the sharpest minds of the East plan for the future. Heads of state, government leaders, CEOs, and economists come together to discuss vaccination hurdles, its impact on economies, and the region's role in the global world order. The Boao Forum for Asia celebrates its 20th anniversary, and CGTN is there, bringing you live, comprehensive coverage of this special event with detailed reports, exclusive interviews, and insightful analysis. The Boao Forum at 20. Special coverage begins April 18th, only on CGTN. See the difference.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back. Now, the Iranian foreign minister has said his country will take revenge for an attack on an underground nuclear site for which it has blamed on Israel. Iranian officials say the Natanz uranium enrichment plant was the target of nuclear terrorism after initially reporting a power failure. Now, new advanced centrifuges to enrich uranium had just been activated there. U.S. intelligence officials have said that a large explosion had completely destroyed the independent internal power system that supplied the centrifuges inside the underground facility. It is estimated that it could take at least 9 months to resume enrichment there. Although the Israeli Prime Minister made no direct comment on the incident, he did say that he will not allow Tehran to build nuclear weapons.
In the Middle East, there is no threat that is more serious, more dangerous, more pressing than that posed by the fanatical regime in Iran. Iran continues to support terrorists around the world in 5 continents, threatening civilians everywhere. Iran has never given up its quest for nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them. And Iran consistently and outrageously calls for Israel's annihilation and works towards that goal. Mr. Secretary, we both know the horrors of war. We both understand the importance of preventing war, and we both agree that Iran must never possess nuclear weapons. My policy as Prime Minister of Israel is clear. I will never allow Iran to obtain the nuclear capability to carry out its genocidal goal of eliminating Israel.
Meanwhile, southern China's Hainan Free Trade Port is set to become a leading market player, both domestically and globally. Authorities say they're confident the province will become increasingly attractive to businesses and capital. Here's Dai Kiai with more.
More than 30 years in the making, the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port has gained traction in recent years. In the past 3 years alone, Hainan has witnessed an increase of more than 700,000 new market entities, exceeding the sum of the past 3 decades. The province's economy has seen a reduced dependence on real estate. Industrial investment has risen from less than 40% to over 60%.
In terms of new drivers for economic growth, we've shifted the driving force from relying mainly on investment, especially investment in real estate and fixed assets, to the combined force of consumption and investment.
The Free Trade Port is also a popular destination for foreign investment. Statistics show there were more than 1,000 newly established foreign invested enterprises in the province last year, nearly 3 times the number in 2019. These enterprises come from more than 80 countries and regions.
The foreign investment utilized has doubled for 3 consecutive years, with accumulated foreign capital investment reaching $5.27 billion. This is more than half of the total paid in foreign capital over the course of the past 30 years.
Officials say Hainan connects China with some of the most vibrant markets in the world, including those in Southeast Asia. It's fair to say that the province is positioned at the intersection of China's dual circulation economy, a strategy that seeks to reinforce the domestic market while staying wide open to overseas ones. As market players gather, a modern structure for industries is taking shape, and a draft law for the Free Trade Port is to be adopted soon. Officials believe that Hainan is sure to be a magnet for businesses and investors. Daikai CGTN, Beijing.
Now, China's digital yuan testing is making steady progress, with more test scenarios coming into use. Several cities, including Beijing, Shenzhen and Suzhou, have piloted the digital currency, and the country is now exploring ways to use it for cross-border transactions in order to meet market demand. Here's Zhang Chunying with a story.
It's 9 o'clock in the morning. At a shopping mall in Shanghai, some lucky winners who won 100 digital yuan packets in the government's lottery can't wait to spend what feels like pennies from heaven.
I feel so lucky to get 100 yuan for free, and the digital yuan seems new and fresh to us, so I just want to give it a try.
Shanghai is not the only city promoting the application of the new form of currency. On December 5th and 6th last year, the eastern city Suzhou handed out 100,000 virtual red packets to its residents via a lottery. And starting on the eve of Double 12 online shopping day, the digital money totaling 20 million yuan or $3 million is valid for spending.
This is the digital renminbi red packet I received this morning. There's 200 yuan inside. I was super happy and even shared a snapshot on social media. A lot of my friends liked it and envy me for winning the lottery.
To redeem the virtual money, winners need to download the official digital renminbi app, which is not yet available to the general public. And then they can see the currency, which looks like a folded banknote, show up. The wallet requires users to tie their accounts to one of 4 major Chinese commercial banks. Similar to Alipay or WeChat Pay, users make payments by scanning merchant barcodes or having their codes scanned. But perhaps the most obvious question is, how private and secure can it be, especially with oversight from a central banking authority?
Or the Union Pay, or if you go to the overseas, you have the MasterCard or debit cards. Every transaction will be recorded. The privacy will be protected at the maximum, right? Not because it is not decentralized, but the technology itself, such like the encryptable protections and the distributed ledger system, right? Those two things make sure that the individual's wealth account will be protected at maximum levels.
The PBOC continues to test the digital yuan in various Chinese cities as it braces for a possible broader rollout for the Winter Olympics in Beijing next February. It's also partnered with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority on the technical testing for cross-border payments on the Chinese mainland and Hong Kong. The realities of truly moving to a cashless society don't seem that far off. Zheng Chunying, CGTN.
Well, let's head to the UK now, where shoppers went into a shopping frenzy across the country, and that's following the reopening after 3 months of lockdown. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the reopening is a major step towards freedom, but he did urge people to behave responsibly as the coronavirus was still a threat. Now, in London's Oxford Street, dozens of people queued outside Primark and Nighttown, undeterred by the unseasonably cold weather. Official data reveals that 2020 was the worst year for Britain's economy in more than 3 centuries, with a 9.8% decline in GDP. Now, hundreds of thousands of businesses have been closed since early January. That's when England entered a 3rd lockdown to stem surging infections, which were driven by the Kent variant of the virus. Meanwhile, the landscape of Europe's antique market is changing silently amid disruptions, which of course are caused by COVID-19 and Brexit. The UK's departure from the European Union has resulted in trade barriers for the industry, which could undermine London's position as the world's 2nd largest art and antique market. Here's Ross Cullen reporting.
Global trade in fine paintings, sculptures, rare furniture and other collectibles is worth billions of dollars a year. The antiques market ranges from the auctions of priceless pieces to dusty heirlooms in village sales. The UK is the world's 2nd biggest market for art and antiques, behind the United States. But Brexit and the pandemic were major blows to sales in Britain, which slumped by 22% last year to the lowest level in a decade. Despite this, some in the British industry forecast brighter days ahead.
Once you get over the sort of hurdles of the logistics side of it, in terms of more bureaucracy with more paperwork, and once people understand that process becomes a little bit slower than it was pre-Brexit, then I think ultimately there's many more opportunities for European collectors to buy in the UK at a more competitive price.
Across the Channel in France, the UK's departure from the EU now means that Paris is the largest art market in the European Union. The French capital is home to the world's most famous art museum, the Louvre, which has some of the world's most recognisable paintings, like the Mona Lisa. But traders here are hoping that the lower value domestic EU art trade will now move from London to Paris. Since January, art headed from the EU to the UK has been subject to customs declarations. Where there used to be frictionless trade, there are now 69 pages of UK regulations specifically for the valuations of imported goods, paperwork which has created immediate concerns for businesses.
The problem is what happens to all these items that have been traded in the past and are now confronted with new regulations that cannot be met retrospectively. I think this is less about the future market because this market will adapt.
London has been one of the world's hubs for the art market for centuries, along with Paris and New York. The challenge for British and European businesses now is ensuring the future trade of ancient goods continues within Europe and across the globe. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
And still on the arts, some musicians have expressed their concerns over future performances in Europe as Brexit will complicate their tours and increase their visa costs. Here's Jemima Walker with more.
Cult with No Name has played in Europe more times than they've played in the north of England. But Brexit could stand in the way of them and their audience across the channel.
Visa conditions are different for each individual country. That also means the costs will vary from country to country, and also the timelines and the waiting times for the issuing of your visa. Logistically, on a practical level, it's going to be incredibly difficult to set up any kind of tour, and it's going to put off it may potentially put off promoters as well that might want to work for us.
For some musicians, touring could become prohibitively expensive.
The bands that it will affect most, I mean, dare I say bands like us actually, who just about break even.
I'm not in it just for me.
For orchestras, there are specific problems. It's thought that the visa costs for an orchestra visiting one country could be almost $30,000, a huge ask for a business with small profit margins. They also need extra documents and insurance to make sure their instruments are transported safely.
Just the sheer toing and froing now over the border, which is subject to customs checks, means that every orchestra is having to look at adding an extra day at either side of the tour to factor in delays, all of which comes at a cost. Up to now, an orchestra has been able to load its own truck, drive across the border, tour around Europe, and come home unencumbered by paperwork. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement now sets a limit that you can do one journey into the EU, 2 laden journeys, and then the truck must return to the UK.
There are questions about what impact restricted travel will have on culture both sides of the channel.
When you think of some of the greatest bands in history, what they did in their early days, so the Beatles in Hamburg, David Bowie, I mean, if it wasn't for Europe in their early experiences, perhaps they wouldn't have been the same band or act that they were.
The British government says it's working hard to find a solution, but so far the EU and the UK have been unable to strike a deal. Touring musicians have put their instruments down during the pandemic, but they say it's Brexit which could render them silent for good. Jemima Walker, CGTN, London.
And shifting focus now, here's a quick look at commodity markets today. Oil prices climbing today on accelerating coronavirus vaccinations globally and, of course, tensions in the Middle East. Also, optimism over a rebound in the U.S. economy did help to improve sentiment. But market players have become more cautious as infections have surged in Europe, India and some emerging markets, while, of course, vaccine rollouts have proved slower than anticipated. Meanwhile, gold prices easing today as Treasury yields remain elevated. They dented the appeal of bullion. Industrial metal prices as a whole have headed south on fears of a pullback in top consumer China, and that's after the country stressed the need to strengthen control of commodity prices that, of course, have hurt businesses locally. As a result, we saw copper prices slipping despite gaining about 30% over the past 5 months. Well, let's head into a short break now, still coming up. Egypt discovers a city that dates back more than 3,000 years.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, let's head to North Africa now. Egypt has announced the discovery of a city in Luxor that dates back more than 3,000 years. The unearthed city is considered one of the major discoveries from ancient Egypt. Yasser Hakim finds out why on Grassroots tonight.
It's the largest city to be ever discovered from ancient Egypt. It's been called the Lost City because many foreign missions have failed to find it over the past decades. Most experts believe this is the most important discovery after the tomb of King Tutankhamun.
Always has the ancient Egyptian cared more about his tomb than his palace. The afterlife more than life itself. That's why almost all our discoveries are tombs and temples. To discover a residential city from the Amenhotep era, known as the Golden Age, is vital. This discovery is the most important after Tutankhamun because it's a big city. It's in Luxor, the modern dynasty, and reveals detailed information about life in ancient Egypt, not death.
Aton City is divided into 3 districts: administrative, industrial, and a residential district for workers. It's in good shape, with houses and roads in between clear to see. Many belongings of former inhabitants are intact as well.
We found ancient homeware, porcelain and pottery pieces. We found a mummified fish showing their talent in mummification. We found a skeleton with a rope around it. We will study if it was a form of punishment. This city gives us details of daily life. We found stairways, we found bakeries and breweries. We found skeletons and a mummified cow. Was the cow worshipped at this time? We are studying every detail now.
Ironically, the archaeological team at the Library of Alexandria stumbled upon Aton City by coincidence while they were looking for burial tombs near the Valley of Kings, 500 kilometers south of Cairo. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's move on now. The coronavirus pandemic has forced a dramatic reduction in international travel, but surfers in China have found a new location, a small bay in Hainan Island. Our reporter Lu Suri has the details.
Bay of the city of Wanning in Hainan province. This bay is also said to have the best waves in China, so it's also made to be the training base for China's national surfing team.
Locals say a group of Japanese tourists came to Zhiyue Bay some 10 years ago and found it was a decent place to catch a wave. News of the untouched spot in China traveled by word of mouth, and more surfers from around the world started showing up. Upon arrival, I was greeted by a calm and gentle sea, which made my first time surfing feel like I was learning in a swimming pool. This 8-year-old girl from Scotland said she's a surfing expert. She's been in China since she was 2 years old and first learned to surf in Bali.
How do you compare this place to Bali? Much better than jellyfish. Do you think I'm gonna make it this time?
I may look awkward, but I'm happy that I made it. Sarah is a primary school math teacher based in Haikou. She came to China from Scotland last October. She said she just enjoyed relaxation this way and looks forward to exploring more of China when the pandemic is over. Now, surfing has become a major means for local officials to jazz up the economy. It was also officially designated as an Olympic sport in 2016, with its debut slated for the Tokyo Games this year. Some say this could mean big things to come for this quiet little village.
10 years ago, when our predecessors first served here, their relatives and villagers would think they were lazy. But now, if you tell them I just came back from serving, people would think you are so healthy, you're enjoying life, or you are making money.
Lu Sirui, CGTN, Hainan Province.
And before we leave you today, a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand weakening early today. Its recent rally running out of steam as investors worried again about the pace of an economic rebound. Now, it failed to hold below 14.50 rand per dollar as the outlook for South Africa's economy remains rocky. The economy, of course, shrunk by a record 7% in 2020 and has shown signs of a sticky rebound in 2021. Meanwhile, Nigeria's naira gaining slightly at the importers and exporters window, where, of course, Forex is traded officially, as the country's external reserve is set to receive a boost with the planned issuance of $500 million in Eurobonds. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.